Egypt was the agricultural superpower a few thousand years ago, and the river flowing through it, the Nile, gave rise to one of the largest, most advanced civilizations of its time. Egypt was in fact so prosperous that it exported grains, gold, pottery and glass not only to its neighbors but also to faraway places like China. Their agriculture comprised mainly of grain. Ancient Egyptians grew barley and einkorn as well as emmer wheat. As you could imagine, they were primarily used in the production of these typical flatbreads and beer, which throw some meat into that equation, and I would call it a perfectly balanced diet. They also grew pulses, vegetables like onions and salads, fruits like apples, figs and dates, as well as papyrus. And now into the nitty-gritty stuff. Ancient Egypt's agricultural year had three seasons. Based on these, they actually developed a whole civil calendar, with each season having 4 months and each month having exactly 30 days. And at the end of each year, 5 extra curricular days were added to create the 365 we know. Now, the seasons, as we all are familiar with, were derived from Mother Nature, more specifically from the Nile River. Yes, it was quite important. The first season, Akhet or inundation, was a season of floods. So without access to their fields, farmers often took up different jobs, such as construction. Second season, Peret or emergence, is when the field work began. Water levels dropped and farmers could sow into the fertile mud that Nile washed up on the fields. And the third season, Shemu or harvest, is when the water levels were at their lowest and the crops were unexpectedly ready for harvest. As you probably know, Egyptian civilization developed directly on the banks of the Nile, where it remains to this day, by the way, with a measly 3% of the total area housing almost 100% of Egypt's 114 million citizens. And as you can imagine, not every farmer could get a plot of land directly at the river, so they developed this ingenious contraption called shadu, basically just a crane with a bucket which they used to direct and redirect water, for example from the Nile into man-made canals which irrigated fields further away, which allowed them to grow the surplus of grains they did. If you would like to know the predominant soil type in this area, the answer is rich silt. And if you are asking how did Egypt get rich silt when the whole country is just a barren desert for the most part, the answer is Akhet. Because the Nile doesn't originate in Egypt. One of its sources comes from Ethiopia, and Ethiopia has some volcanic highlands, so the rock just got transported. And there are allegedly even 30 feet deep silt deposits in the very north of the Nile Delta. So good for Egyptians. And another factor that played a major role in ancient Egyptian agriculture was its many gods. Predominantly Hapi, the god of the Nile, who was responsible for the yearly beneficial flooding. So if the Nile didn't flood or did but too much, Hapi was punishing the people and they needed to make up for something. Now this was thousands of years ago. In the present times, the Nile is drying up as we speak, but Egyptian farmers still have the same practices, which is just flooding their fields with water from the Nile. But you tell me, if you have a favorite recipe for a cake that you've been baking for years and the recipe asks for 4 cups of white flour per batch, and suddenly there is no flour to be found in the pantry or at the store, you can't really bake the cake anymore, can you? And since Egypt has been baking the very same cake for millennia and the recipe asks for exorbitant amounts of water every year, but the water reserves are shrinking every year, it looks like a pretty unfortunate situation with no cake in sight. There are some solutions to this dry issue though, ranging from your basic drip irrigation to whole land development projects. And Egyptian farmers are already starting to put them to use, but I'm gonna tell you all about them in next week's video, so stay tuned and thanks for watching.